had for 10 years in nightlife was a lot of cocaine fun, a lot of ecstasy, MDMA fun, 40 to 60 cigarettes a day fun, gambling fun, pornography fun, strip club fun. I'm using fun loosely. So it was a really unhealthy search for fun in those places, which were highly destructive for me, smoking aside. But I would do cocaine for 2 or 3 years and then kind of get bored with it. And I would do marijuana. Like, I'm just going to smoke and get stoned every single day. And then, no, I didn't find what I was looking for there. Okay, let me try and gamble. Let me go to Vegas. Let me go to Atlantic City. Let me, learn craps and blackjack and poker. And okay, I didn't find it there. I just got a lot broker. So I think it was this exploration of, I didn't know what I was looking for. I was trying to fill a hole. And I needed to make sure that I left no stone unturned down that path. I have a brain tumor. There's just something the loss of feeling was really scary. I'm connected to EKGs. None of the tests reveal anything. And that was a really clear moment for me where I realized, what if I did die in the next month? And what if I did have an inoperable brain tumor? Would I be happy with the life that I lived? Hadn't done anything for others, hadn't mentored others, hadn't given charitably, hadn't been a good friend particularly, hadn't been a particularly good boyfriend. And I just realized, wow, I've really gotten to the end. I'm emotionally bankrupt. I'm spiritually bankrupt. I'm certainly morally bankrupt. And this is not how I'd want it to end. So that started a process. At this point, I just know things need to change. I start reading the Bible again. I start reading this book that my father had given me, which it's interesting. I've tried to read it, years since, and it doesn't hit me the same way that it did then.
Interesting.
The book was about finding God and living a pure life and returning to the innocence of a child. Here is a man's pursuit of righteousness, honor, integrity, peacemaking, innocence, virtue. And I am none of these things. In fact, I am leading people to the opposite of those things. So I think just what was happening here was these extremes, like worlds were colliding. And I realized I didn't need a pivot in my life. A small course correction was not going to be the answer. I was somehow going to have to find the 180-degree opposite of everything I said, thought, and did. And that's what I didn't know how to do. I started to fill out the applications for the famous humanitarian aid organizations I'd heard of. Save the Children, Doctors Without Borders, Red Cross, World Vision. And I commit in my mind that I'm not going to go back to New York, and I'm going to actually change my life, and I'm going to give a year back. I don't go back to New York. While I'm go ahead. I went to the south of France. A buddy had a house in the mountains, in the remote Pyrenees Mountains. And I go there. There was no internet, so I had to come down. There was no phone and no internet, so I had to come down into the town on a bike just to, check messages. But I go there, and it's time alone. It's solace. It's time for prayer. It's time for reading. It's this cleansing reset. There's no drugs. I go back to France. I pack up, and 3 weeks later, I'm on this hospital ship. And the night before I joined the ship, I had this moment of clarity. So this is a 522-foot ocean liner, so a huge cruise liner that had been gutted and turned into a state-of-the-art hospital. And this organization for 25 years had sailed up and down the coast of Africa, bringing volunteer doctors, surgeons, and nurses on their vacation time to provide free medical services. So the ship would pull into a port and then, work there for a year and then sail off to the next place. So I have this moment of clarity that I really am going to need to quit all the vices before I join this group of Christian doctors and humanitarians on a ship. And there was something, symbolic about the gangway, right? Like, I'm going to walk up the gangway of this ship. They're going to lift the gangway. I'm kind of trapped on it with 350 other volunteers. And then I'm going to sail away to a new continent and a new life. I better not bring any of that stuff with me. So very intentionally, the night before I got on the ship, I remember smoking 60 cigarettes. Smoked 3 packs, my last 3 packs of cigarettes. I remember getting hammered, drinking 8 or 9 beers, and just knowing that I would have to go, cold turkey or all in to allow this new life to develop. And that was a clarifying moment. I drink a little bit now, years later, but I've never had another cigarette. I've never had a drag, or 17 years now, working at the clubs 4 nights a week, surrounded by sex and drugs and alcohol. But my environment changed, and here I am with a bunch of Christian humanitarian doctors who are the most sacrificial people that I've ever met in my lives. Smoking is not cool on a hospital ship, right? Drinking is not cool. There's no casino. Nobody's playing, blackjack. I mean, this is so missional and so purposeful. And I loved the new environment. I couldn't get enough of it. I never wanted to leave. It was home. It felt like coming back home. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. Right. To cure mom and sick people like hers. I didn't do anything doctor-like for 10 years in clubs. Doctors don't come to nightclubs and buy bottles of Cristal. So I didn't know many doctors. But now I'm with a bunch of doctors. And there was one doctor, this guy, Dr. Gary Parker, who had been there 21 years, and I made him a mentor. I wanted to spend as much time as possible. He was one of the reasons why I went back for the second year, because he had dedicated 21 years of his life to this work. And I'm like, well, I have at least another year, right? Let me just not end with this year-long tithe when the year was finished. Let me go back for a second tour. In the second tour, I felt like I really understood the medical world, and I still had to take all the pictures of the surgeries and the before and afters, but I wanted to get off of the ship and understand more of the context of how people were living in Liberia. Now, this was a post-war country, 14 years of brutal civil war, led by Charles Taylor, had torn apart the country. My second year ended. I was 30 years old. I went back to New York City, and I tried to put action to that very simple, commission. So I saw the small impact that I had made promoting the work of mercy ships. In between the 2 missions, there was a little gap in between year 1 and year 2. And I came back to New York City with my photos. I got a gallery donated in Chelsea. I printed 108 of my photos. And I invited all my nightclub friends to come in and see the work that these doctors were doing. And I raised about $100,000 for their work through that show. Oh. I remember callous people that, would come to the nightclub, who were just kind of, it didn't seem like they would care about anything, standing in front of some of my images weeping. Right. As they read the caption, as they learned, hey, this is someone just my age, born in a different environment, with a terrible affliction, with no doctor to go to. So I had a little bit of wow, that, success. And so instead of promoting the DJ and the $1,000 bottles of Cristal and the, celebrities that were going to be in the club that night, the special guests, I was promoting something very different. And I saw that was working, and that skill that I had, potentially learned over 10 years or misused for 10 years, promoting something, certainly less redemptive or purposeful, could actually be translated and used to promote the work of mercy ships. The next step was, I thought it would be possible to promote clean water for humans. I crashed with my old club partner who lets me sleep on his closet floor for free rent. And I had the idea, bring clean water to everybody on the planet. And I had the benefit of not having any institutional charitable knowledge outside of my experience with mercy ships. And I just was talking to people that worked at MTV or at fashion magazines or at Sephora. or at the local bank. And I realized so many of my friends didn't trust charities. They did not trust the system. Almost all of their problems had to do with money. Where does the money really go? How much of the money actually gets to the people who need it? How much of the money actually goes to the cause? And, the term social entrepreneur wasn't even around back then, but, I just took a very entrepreneurial approach to this and said, well, I wonder if through a new business model, I could speak to those objections. I could reach out to these cynical, skeptical, disenchanted people and get them excited about giving in a new way. So I had a very simple idea: separate the overhead from the money that people would give to the organization. So open up 2 bank accounts. Promise the public that 100% of anything they would ever give to Charity Water would go directly to help people get clean water. And then in the other bank account, go and find a small group of business leaders and entrepreneurs to pay for those unsexy overhead costs. The staff salaries, the office rent, the flights, the insurance, the Epson toner for the copy machine. So church and state, 2 differently audited bank accounts. And I wasn't sure how I would fund the overhead, but boy, was it clean. And I thought it was a really compelling story that beyond just promoting clean water, an inarguable common good for the world that I thought everybody could get behind, we would now have this hyper-transparent business model that would speak to the most common objection people have to giving to charity, which is, where does the money go? So I tried this out. My only idea on day one was to get a club donated. It was September 7th. It was my birthday. I was turning 31, and I got a club in the meatpacking district donated during Fashion Week. I got open bar donated for an hour, and then I invited everybody to come to celebrate my 31st birthday. But to get inside the club, they had to put $20 in this big plexi box. And we were going to take 100% of whatever was in that box at the end of the night, and we're going to go help our first person get access to clean water. And I printed up my photos. So in the club, it's kind of juxtaposed with people drinking dirty water and wells being drilled and people drinking clean water. I'd also seen that when I was in Africa. I'd seen the solution to the problem of wells being drilled and communities going from dirty to clean. So I put those photos up, and 700 people came that night. And I'll never forget, a drug dealer came that night. He was a pretty high-end weed dealer. And he put $500 in the box. And he looked at me and he said, "This is the first charitable gift I've ever made in my life.
Really? Wow.
But I know where this money's going, and I trust you." We raised $15,000. I remember we counted it and double counted, and we're taking pictures of the money in the stacks, because this is your first, this is day one of the organization. And we took that money immediately to a refugee camp in northern Uganda. We built our first water well, and then we fixed a couple other broken wells. And then the most important thing was we sent the photo proof video of clean water flowing, and then the satellite images of where every single water project was. And I emailed the 700 people that came and said, "You did this. Here's where 100% of your $20 went. And because you came and gave, people are drinking clean water. And here's the proof." The charity started off very quickly, and people loved the 100% model. It just began to build a lot of momentum. We raised $2 million in the first year through a flurry of activities, gallery shows and events, and people doing concerts for us, and people giving online. And we were selling a $20 bottle of water, just as a symbolic gesture where all $20 would go, and people would buy cases of the water. So it was a year of a lot of success. And then in the second year, we were on track to raise $6 million. But always a struggle for the overhead. Always a struggle to, find a donor to pay for employee number 2 or to pay for the next month's office rent. I mean, we were in a really crappy office, covered in grease floors. It was an old printing press. So I was doing all that work, trying to convince people to help me build the actual organization because the 100% model was so resonant. We got to a point about a year and a half in where we had almost $1 million in the water bank account, about to go out and build 100 wells. And we were about to miss payroll. And we had 9 people at the time. And I remember just thinking, and by the way, people had been warning me that this model would fail. nobody thought this business model was a good idea, right? I mean, effectively, you can't use any of the money you raise from the public to actually run the company, to run the organization. But I just had such faith in it. And I had tapped out all the people that I knew for the overhead. And I was hitting a point where I realized maybe they're right. Maybe this is a really dumb business model. So I start calling lawyers about shutting down the charity. It's a year and a half in, even though we've raised, millions of dollars. You're not bankrupt if you have $1 million. But for me, if we borrowed 1 penny, $1, £1 from that bank account, and we used it on anything overhead related, our integrity would be forever compromised. In such an extreme way, I'm like, there's a crack at the foundation. I would never even want to build on top of that. I'd much rather shut it down and have my integrity. And at that moment, I had written a cold email to a British internet entrepreneur, actually about something completely different, not even about funding, about trying to get exposure on his social media network. It was called Bebo at the time. And so he writes me back and says, man, I love this idea. Like, what a cool idea, getting everybody clean water. Checked out your website, really good design and branding, but it's a bad time for me to help. So I don't think anything of it. I was just happy that, somebody responded to a cold email. Well, around this time of near insolvency or bankruptcy, at least on the overhead account, he writes me and he says, hey, I'm going to be in town. I'd love to meet you and learn a little more about what you're doing. He comes in. I remember I pull out my laptop. I take him through 100 photos and my whole story. He's working in this, we're in this crappy office. There's 9 other people. There's a couple volunteers around. And I remember just thinking, boy, this is like the worst pitch I've done. He is not into it. He's not really laughing at the jokes. He's just doesn't seem very compelled by this. He leaves and, says, well, give me your bank account details and, I'll see how I can help. And 2 days later, it's around midnight. Again, I'm almost at this point just relinquished to the fact that I'm over. I'm going to shut down the charity. Maybe I'll try with a different business model, or maybe I'll just try with the traditional business model. And I get an email from him and he says, hey, it was great meeting you. I just wired $1 million into your overhead account. And we went from bankrupt to 13 months of funding. He said, I believe in your idea. You just need more time. And that was $700 million ago. And this year we'll raise over $130 million. There are 131 unbelievably accomplished entrepreneurs and business leaders who pay all the overhead. 20 of them in the UK. It's the founders of Spotify and Shopify and WordPress and LinkedIn and, an unbelievable group of really a lot of tech entrepreneurs who love paying for the software engineers and the UI UX designers and the actual core organization of Charity Water, so that now millions and millions of people around the world are donating and have the purest way to give, knowing that 100% of the money goes. But that was really a key moment of, it was almost all over. But, if I were to go back and the money was not going to come in, I still would shut down the charity. I wouldn't have borrowed.